back to Navigating Life, a podcast here at Lighthouse Baptist Church. And as we're approaching Easter, we have been looking at the different scenes leading up to Easter. We saw the triumphal entry, we saw the trial with Pilate, and then these last 2 weeks we've been focused on the crucifixion, and specifically we've been looking at the people that surround the crucifixion. And it's been really interesting just coming from me and talking to Shauna. We enjoy when you talk about from different people's perspectives, and it kind of helps us imagine being there and looking at it from all these different things. And so this was, the death of Christ. Who are you? And specifically that question, who are you? Where last week you were talking about, the two criminals on the cross on either side of Jesus, and then this week you talked about the soldiers that were there, the centurion, and the crowd itself, as well as Barabbas. And we're going to dive into all that and take a close look at all these different people that were there. But if you had to do the main thing of this whole, the death of Christ, who are you, part one and part two, as we're looking at, what would be the main thing that we need to take away from it?
I would say that we are all Barabbas. That was the last point.
Right.
And it was kind of a bonus point. But to me, it wraps up the truth of what we see in the death of Christ, is that he died so that we could all go free. And it doesn't matter which of these characters. Be Pilate. You could be Pilate. You could be Peter. I didn't talk about him through the series, but it's one of the most powerful. I relate so much to Peter, just in general, all through his life. But how Peter denied him in his darkest moment, but God still restored him. We could talk about that. That's all part of the story. But as far as this series goes, and especially these two messages, mostly I want people to recognize that we are all Barabbas, and that there was a choice. God made a choice, and it's His grace. He didn't have to,
right?
But He did. He made a choice to set us free, and die in our place, and so that would be the main thing to me.
Absolutely. And it's been powerful gospel presentations through each of these. And one of the cool things as we work through all of these people is, they were all doing wrong. They were all participating in the crucifixion of the Messiah, yet they were all offered forgiveness from that Messiah, which is mind-blowing.
Absolutely.
I was reading I can't remember who said it, but it was like, if the people who actually crucified Christ were offered forgiveness, how could we ever say, there's not forgiveness for us?
How many times I've been told, God, countless in witnessing to someone, but you don't know what I've done.
Right, I'm too bad.
Yeah, and most of the time, that's people, that just look at me as a preacher and say, but preacher, you're a preacher.
Right.
And you don't understand what it's like to be a sinner.
Trust me, I do.
Come on, that's people who haven't known me very long, but
they only talk to you on Sundays.
That's right. That's right. But man, we're all honestly, we're all that centurion.
Yeah.
We all crucified him, but he set us all free. Those that are set free. So yeah, it's everything we do is because of the gospel, and the gospel obviously is no more apparent than it is in the life of those who stood around the cross and watched Jesus die and played a hand in it. We all played a hand in it, and if he forgave those who physically drove the nails through his hands, which is the centurion, then God, what if he restored Peter,
right?
To not only go to heaven, but to preach the most powerful messages ever preached, and to see thousands of people converted through his ministry,
Right.
And Peter, cursed and said, I don't know him.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your excuse, man? You ain't got
Mhm.
one. Well, I don't have one. None of us do.
Right. That was one of the things I was talking with Shauna after the message this past week, and we were saying it's comforting to understand that we don't have to have it all together, that we don't have to have it all figured out. And it's
Absolutely.
like, again, if Peter can do that, and then as we read at the end of the story, like his acquaintances, his disciples, his own family were standing really far away.
Right.
They weren't there
At a
with him.
distance. Yeah.
And yet he still loves and forgives and shows that compassion and mercy towards us. It's a great comfort for when it's like, man, we don't measure up. Like,
Right.
listen, I'm a pastor. I don't measure up. Like,
Thankful we don't have to.
Right, absolutely. And so jumping into our first question, like I said at the beginning, it was interesting as we're looking at these different people. And you talked, of course, about the importance of the crucifixion and the importance of the blood and the importance of why all of that mattered. But it wasn't the focus of these last two messages. So why is it so important for us to look at the different people who are there?
Well, I think it's because, again, the cross is personal, and we need to see ourselves in that. And there's, I believe, I talked about Sunday, how I see myself in every one of these characters.
Right.
In different times of my life. And there was, I was talking with someone today who's going through some stuff, and I was sharing with them some of my personal struggles in the same area when I was in their place in life.
Right.
This person is living a very similar life I did at one point. And so I was like, man, look, I'm not just reading you a story. I've been there, done that.
Right, you can relate.
Absolutely. And learn from my mistakes. Don't do this. Don't make the same ones.
Right.
I'm okay with that because I've already made them. I can't undo them. It's not, I'd rather you learn from them and rather than say, I went through it, you got to go through it too. No, I want you to learn from those. And there's been periods of my life, just like you and everyone else, where I faced certain trials. I don't know. There's different points in my life where I can relate to every one of these different people, depending on what I was going through at the time. And I don't know where you are at, or Joe sitting in the audience, or Jane, or whomever, but I'd be willing to bet you that we can all see ourselves in one of these people.
Right.
And just like you said, I believe you said a while ago, every one of these people were offered forgiveness. And so it's important for us to see that it doesn't matter who you are in the story, not a fictional story, but the story of creation, the story of the fall, the story of salvation, the story of ultimately God coming back and setting up his kingdom here. There's a new kingdom. We are all part of that story, and it doesn't matter where you're at in that story or what character you play in that story. There's forgiveness, and we need to recognize that, or everyone needs to recognize that. And so I think it's important to look at all of these characters so we see that all of us are offered forgiveness. Unfortunately, some of these characters in this story, this true actual event occurrence, died without receiving Christ. They rejected him to the very last breath. And the truth is, some listening to me, either Sunday or on this podcast or sometime later on, will be that person. And that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But the truth is, not everybody's going to receive Christ. Not everybody's going to heaven. And but the good news is, we all can. We were given that. I mean, all of these people were offered forgiveness. There's just some that rejected it, and I'm just praying that there's some who who hear this series, hear these messages, or hear this particular message, for instance, will say, you know what, I don't want to be that person. I want to be the person. I want to be the centurion.
Right.
I might have drove nails through his hands, but I'm recognizing today that he's the Lord.
Absolutely. So let's take a dive into these people. You talked about all of them on Sunday, but if there's some things you weren't able to explain about them, or just some different perspective, you started with the carpetbaggers. And so for everybody familiar with their U.S. history class in high school, it probably at least rung a bell if you didn't remember exactly what it was.
Right.
But like you explained, these people right after the Civil War ended came from the North and were just looking to take advantage of everything that happened, the destruction, the lack of economy, everything that had gone on in the South. And like, listen, we can make a mint off of the misfortune of others. And you equated this to those people casting lots for Christ's clothes. But how'd you get to carpetbaggers, and why did that stand out to you so much?
And well, because what I see when I read that story is opportunist. I see that these people are they are not emotionally connected whatsoever to the scene that's going on around them. They're in the middle of it. They're seeing the darkness, and I mean they're hearing all of the sounds that are happening. They are literally in the story of the death of Christ, and they're unaffected by it.
Right.
And but what they are looking for is an opportunity for them to gain something themselves, and no matter, literally, the Messiah is dying feet away from them. This is one of the most pivotal moments in time. You ever think about that? Period.
Yeah.
It is one of the most pivotal moments in all of creation, in all of time. And they're there. I mean, we say, I know you're way too young. You weren't born yet, but I remember where I was at very vividly when the shuttle blew up as it was was the first teacher ever into, Krista McCullough was her name, into space. She was a civilian, and they put her on the spaceship and was sending her up, and it blew up. And I remember it so vividly. That was a major time in the history of America. All of those who are old enough, maybe you remember where you were at when 9/11 struck. I remember very, very vividly that moment. That was a pivotal point in the time of our history. None of that, that stuff, it don't even pale. It's not even on the spectrum when we talk about the importance in the history of time. This was up there. I can't think of the creation. Okay. Maybe when Lucifer fell, the birth of Christ, the moment he breathed his last breath, and the moment he breathed another one, and in the tomb. I'm sure there's some others, but
I would say the most important until he comes back. Like,
sure, absolutely.
If you think of it like a plot in a story, the build-up was to the cross,
right?
And so that was the climax, and now we're in the second build-up until the return.
And typically, take the story. Typically, if you're paying attention, you get to the height of that story, then you're locked in. You're paying attention to what's going on. These cats are just over here gambling for his clothes.
Yeah, oblivious.
They're completely unaware of the moment that they're in, and that's just shocking to me. But in some ways, but then in other ways, I look back and I go, but how many times have I had? I've just missed it. So not maybe not to that point, but there's been, I don't know, man. It's important to see that these guys were opportunists to a point to where we can get so focused on our own heart's desires and getting what we want that we miss what's going on around us.
I think another thing, especially with these soldiers here, they were so used to crucifixion. They were so used to just being in it that they were numb to anything. And, for me, it's like, okay, I think I relate a little closer to that side. It's, okay, I grew up in church. I understand how church works. I'm used to the ebbs and flows of the church here, especially growing up as a pastor's kid, as you can relate. It's like you just kind of know how to do it. You know how to go through the flow. You know how to go through the motions. Right. And if you're not careful, it's easy just to go on autopilot. And it's like, all right, this is just another crucifixion. We'll do it. It's a little different. It's Passover week. We got to get them down a little early. But, I mean, the Romans were crucifying all the time.
Right.
This wasn't, it wasn't a big deal to them because they were unaware, but also they were just numb to it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And maybe that's what was happening with these people. But I think it's important to look at them to recognize that we can fall into the same category. Right. We become numb to sin that's around us all the time. And it's like, well, that's just, that's just part of what happens. That's the life we live in today. There's, and we, hey, let's take, for instance, so these, how many believers, will partake in things today that will make them money, whereas at some point in time they would have stepped back and went, that's sin. I'm not going to be a part of that. And they may take a stand and say, hey, that's sin. I don't want to get involved. But when it becomes something that will make them money, well, wait a minute.
Right.
Maybe it's not so bad, and the world's dying around us, literally, and we're more concerned about making money and what will help us, what will give us what we want, the desires of our own flesh and our own soul, our own body, that we make compromises. That we that one day we're going to look back and go, how was I thinking?
Right.
And we could talk about 1,000 different things.
Absolutely.
But the point is, I've seen it so often. I mean, cheating on taxes or cheating someone out of money, business wise, making money off of people we shouldn't really be making money off of in certain circumstances in our life. Rather than sharing the gospel with them or being a good example, working a job on Sunday that we really shouldn't be working. I've been there, done that. Whatever. There's, being involved in illegal activity, that's profitable. Could go on and on. There's just being involved in immoral,
Right.
We were. Not to go down too far rabbit hole, but I'm going to say this and we'll move on to the next one. But you're familiar with, our listeners may or may not be familiar with this new group called Live Golf. And so basically, the PGA Tour has been around forever. Saudis have come up and said, hey, we want to be involved in golf. They couldn't get into PGA, so what they do is they create their own tour called the Live Golf Tour, LIV. And so they're using their massive,
basically limitless.
Oh my gosh, limitless money that they get from our $4 a gallon gasoline, and then they're paying off players to leave the PGA to come play for them. And I mean, stupid money. What was it that the last one got? Was it $300 and some odd million?
Yeah. All I know is they offered Tiger $1 billion to come.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, golly.
And here's, me and even some of my family has said, I wouldn't turn that down. I'd go, you know, and that's the truth. Most people would.
Mm-hmm.
And almost everybody that they've offered that kind of money
Right.
has gone. But here's the problem with that is the Saudis live completely immoral lives.
Mm-hmm.
They are terrible people, and and they're trying to buy, or they are buying their way into the hearts of Americans by doing this, and we don't have time to go down, to argue that whole thing. But there's a big controversy in the golf world over that, and most are saying, "Hey, take their money, man. What difference does it make?"
Yeah, generational wealth. Like,
Absolutely. But I'm going, no, don't. I mean, it's just not worth it. That money's tainted. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Uh, there's so many carpetbaggers. There's so many people today who will give up their faith or compromise their faith, rather than take a stand if it benefits them financially or in some similar way.
let's keep moving on because I really want to talk about the centurion. This is just me selfishly. It's the one that stood out the most, and
Sure.
maybe it's because I don't know if I'd become kind of numb to the story, but it just hit me watching the centurion worship after the death and realize after the death what
Powerful.
happened. So
Yeah.
I put in my notes the centurion goes from killer to convert.
I like that. You should have told me that last week.
It would have worked. I thought about it yesterday as
There
I
you
was
go.
typing this up, but yeah. So talk about the centurion for a minute, and then I have a couple things I want to throw in there as well.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I want to hear your take on it. But the centurion, I likewise relate to very much. I don't know, just maybe personality or background or whatever. But the centurion was just doing his job.
Right.
He wasn't raised a Jew. He probably didn't know. He'd maybe heard, I guess, of Messiah, or that there would be a Messiah.
But probably kind of like, here's a brief of the people here, so you
Yeah.
just kind of understand who they are.
He didn't grow up in Sunday school.
No.
He just kind of knew a little bit about who that, but and so he wasn't looking for the Messiah.
No.
He didn't have the clues that the other Jews around did, but he was mostly just doing his job. But when it went dark and the thunder clapped and the earthquake came, he recognized that there was something different.
Mm-hmm.
And what's beautiful about the centurion is that you and I were talking before we went recording. You think about the first two converts in the church. The church was established at this point, and two of the first converts was, this thief, common thief,
Right.
hanging on the cross, and the centurion, a Roman, a non-Jew.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know. I know God don't do things by happenstance, or I just have to believe that God did that intentionally for us to recognize. It don't matter what your background is. It don't matter what you've done. If you were the actual one that drove the nails through the hands, you didn't have to grow up in church. None of that matters. If you just recognize who Jesus is,
mm-hmm.
and recognize your need for him, that's all that counts.
Absolutely. Some of the things, as I was doing some more reading on the centurion, just because I was interested in him, I never thought about this before, and I wondered if you had either. But in my reading, it was from John MacArthur's New Testament commentary, and he pointed out that Christ was not like any other crucifixion victim that the centurion had ever killed before. Because just like the people casting lots, this was another day in the office for the centurion.
Sure.
Which is mind-blowing to us, but the reality of the situation was, again, the Romans were crucifying all the time. This guy was in charge of them. He got the orders. He crucified. That's what he did.
Right.
But this guy, Jesus, was different. One, he's up on the cross and he's offering forgiveness. He hears them pray for forgiveness to the people who are doing this to him. Automatically different. Like,
oh yeah.
All the other, I mean, by the point of the cross, the people are done trying to plead their innocence or anything, but they're not sitting there saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. His ears probably had to perk up a little bit there.
Sure.
Well, then he hears the conversation with the thief, and he says, today you're going to be with me in paradise. And he got the wheels have to be turning. Like, who is this guy? How can he
Right.
be doing this? He's nailed to the cross. And we talked last week about some of the gory details, and I was reading some more just about like how the nerves would have reacted and constant pain and
Right.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he's got to be thinking, how is this guy even functioning this way? And that was one of the things that I told you before, I'd never thought about before. Jesus was the only person ever who chose when to die in this crucifixion. He's up there on the cross, and everybody else is either, they're going to bleed to death or suffocate. Those are going to be the two, most likely
Right.
suffocation. Jesus is up, he's still talking. And one of the things MacArthur pointed out is it says, this was not normal behavior of a crucifixion victim. People who died in this torturous fashion suffered from oxygen deprivation to their brains and were incoherent long before they would have died. And yet Jesus is up there having conversations, and then he hears them cry out to God, saying, why have you forsaken me? And then into your hands I commit my spirit. It is finished. All these sayings of Christ that we get on the cross. The cheers going, how is this guy talking? Like, his body should not be able to do this unless he has absolute, complete, utter control over everything that's happening in his body.
Right.
And then he sees him again say, it is finished, and then die. And he's sitting there going, this is the one. And again, when the earthquake happens and the darkness descends, we get, this line out of Luke. It said, verse 47, so chapter 23, verse 47. Now, when the centurion saw what had taken place, which is cool, he's a witness to everything
Right.
that happens. It says he praised God.
Yeah.
He worships, and he goes, this truly was, because look what he says, certainly this man was innocent. Other translations, certainly this man was righteous.
Right.
He knows that, all right, this guy was different, completely different, and he praises God. He praises Yahweh, not one of the pantheon gods,
Right.
not one of the other gods he's ever been familiar with. He worships, and like you said, we had the convert of the thief on the cross, and now we have the convert of the centurions, and the account of Matthew tells us those other soldiers that were there, they also responding. So we see the gospel in full effect right here at the death of Christ, where it's not just Jews, it's Jews and Gentiles, it's everybody, these people that are there, part of the crucifixion. That was mind-blowing to me to a certain extent, just because I never thought about those details of this before.
And that's what's so beautiful about this book. Again, none of it's by happenstance. There are details all throughout it that you could read it every day for the rest of your life and miss stuff. There's so much truth there. There's so much beauty there. It's so rich. The story is so powerful. There's everyone can relate to one of these people, if not all of them. And the centurion certainly. I love, like you said, the part where it says, and he worshipped.
Right.
The CSB says he began to glorify God.
Right.
You kind of alluded to, but the Romans didn't care what God you worshipped, and they worshiped hundreds, and they would just add another one, to meet their own desires or needs or whatever. But Yahweh is exclusive. That's one thing that a lot of why the world rejects him a lot. The God we serve is because he is exclusive, and he says that there's only one way, and that is the God that this man, who was raised to be all inclusive, when the darkness fell and the thunder struck, he recognized this was truly the Messiah, and there was something different, and he worshiped him, and it's a beautiful story.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and jump to the crowd for sake of time. So you can continue there right after the verse about the centurion. We're in verse 48. And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, and you talked about that. That's why they were there. They wanted to see the show. whether they were excited about the crucifixion or against the crucifixion, heartbroken about the crucifixion. We see all the different gospel accounts. There was a massive crowd there to just watch the whole thing. And again, Luke chooses the word spectacle.
Right.
Most of them weren't there
Yeah.
hoping that, something crazy would happen. They were sitting there, it's like, this guy, this is a crazy guy. They finally got him. Let's watch the show as he's put to death.
Yep.
But look at their reaction was really interesting to me as well. Because again, remember, darkness has come, the thunderclap is there, the earthquake has happened as we put all the accounts together from the different gospels. And then Luke tells us when they saw what had taken place, they returned home, beating their chests.
Yeah.
And I was telling you before, that phrase was really standing out to me, and I wanted to look into it. And Luke uses the exact same phrase just a few chapters before in chapter 18, where Jesus is telling a parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And the tax collector is standing far off because he doesn't think he's worthy to go before God. And he's actually terrified of God in the moment. It says he was beating his chest, pleading for mercy from God. And when we see that there, it's like, oh, something has happened to this crowd. And again, whether they were just hoping the Messiah was going to jump off the cross and destroy the Romans, or whether they were just afraid of God in this moment, something has happened where they're leaving, and it's not with the same attitude that they went there with.
Sure. We don't know. The scripture doesn't lay it out and tell us why they were beating their chest. And there's been lots of speculation. I tend to think it's one or two things. I don't know how it could be anything else really, other than maybe they recognize that they had messed up. That they have crucified the Messiah. Now, I don't know, and maybe that's what they're beating their chest out of their. They feel terrible, like the tax collector.
Right.
Tax collector was a criminal. I mean, they all stole from people. That's why they were hated so much among the Jews. Not to mention, and basically, the Roman government gave them authority to steal. They said, look, you take whatever you want to take as long as we get our cut. And it gave them permission to abuse people in order to get it. And so, that's what a lot of them did. But, and so I can see him over there beating his chest going, oh man, I'm a terrible person, but here's the thing. Everybody there was as terrible as him, so maybe this crowd is going home going, oh, look how bad we are. All of mankind has caused this to happen.
Yeah.
Maybe. I tend to just, I don't know, call it a hunch, so to speak. But I just tend to think it's that based off of, it's not a hunch really. It's based off of my reading and understanding of what took place in those days from scripture and other books, is that they were mourning because they thought that Jesus was the Messiah. And they had, they had the opposite attitude that the centurion had. And it's probably a mixture of these two.
Yeah.
Some were beating their chest going, look at what we've done. Others, I think, were beating their chest going, what a sad day. We thought this was the Messiah, was going to set us free from Rome, and now here he is dead. He can't help us. I really think everyone there, all the Jews that were there were mourning. Some because they recognized that they had done wrong, and some because they felt like that this wasn't the Messiah, and they thought that he was.
I think the religious leaders, especially the ones who were they were the ones pushing the whole thing.
Right.
Both Joel and Amos give us prophecies of the cross and of the death of the Messiah. And in both of those, it talks about the darkness. And I think I'm going to get them confused. It's either Joel or Amos where it talks about the sun's light failing and this darkness coming. And in both of them, it talks about that judgment of God coming in the darkness. And so for those who really knew those prophecies and had memorized them all, I can just imagine myself sitting there going, oh no,
Oh yeah.
oh
We
no,
messed
I
up.
I know what this is about now.
Right.
And again, then leaving and going, wow,
That's one thing I pointed out Sunday, and we can't miss is that they did know him.
right,
I mean, they followed him. They watched him. You know, the feeding of the 5,000. That story. It wasn't like it wasn't so. This coming Sunday's Easter. We're gonna have a big crowd here Sunday. Right. Which I'm excited about. We talked about in staff meeting. Church was full this past Sunday, and so when it comes to Easter, it's gonna be crowded, which is great. That's exciting. That happens once a year for every church, mostly. There's a big crowd for Easter. The thing is that the feeding of the 5,000 wasn't necessarily that. It was always a crowd around Jesus. Everywhere he went, when his ministry really kicked off, look, you don't make people walk all of a sudden and not draw a crowd. There were people that was coming to see who he was about and what he was about. And so everywhere he went, there was a crowd. All these people knew him, knew that he was Jesus from Nazareth, who his parents were, that he had healed blind people and, all this stuff. And so even though they knew him, they didn't take a stand for him. They didn't stand up and tell others that they knew him. We focus on Peter denying him.
right,
Where was everybody else?
yeah.
Honestly.
Luke tells us in a second here that
Yeah.
all of his acquaintance
Yeah.
and the women who had followed him from Galilee, they were at a distance.
Absolutely. And that's, again, how many of us live that life? Hey, I believe that's who he is, but I'm not going to risk my reputation in the community to make that stand and to say, hey, do y'all not recognize who this guy is? Do you not recognize this as the Messiah? Do you not see, I mean, unfortunately, it may take too many people reaching their deathbed like that criminal, like that thief, before they are willing to take a stand. But I don't know. It's this crowd definitely knew him. They had followed him, but when it came down to that moment, they stood at a distance. So here's my question for you listening. If you know him, you really believe that he is Jesus. You really believe that Jesus was the Messiah. You really believe that he's the only way to salvation. You really believe that every human being, apart from being saved by grace of God, is destined for hell. Why are you standing at a distance? Why are you not pulling up a stone and standing up on top of it and drawing a crowd and going, do y'all not see who this was?
Right.
Why are we not preaching Pentecost? The message Peter preached after that. Why are we not taking such a stand? Why is the crowd going home going, dang, that stinks?
Yeah. And that's the exciting thing. That's the good news, right? Like all these other ones, the thief on the cross has good news. The ones gambling had good news. The centurion has good news. The crowd also has good news. We don't see it right here. Well, like you said, we see it at Pentecost because Peter stands up and goes, hey, you guys were in the crowd.
Right.
You're the ones who shouted, crucify him, crucify him.
Yeah.
And we see there a huge crowd, 3,000 souls is what we're told in Acts, come to receive Christ that day. And so there's
just that day. And more were added daily.
Yeah, another 5,000 over the next couple of weeks.
Right.
So
that's right.
Within a few weeks, this crowd receives the hope that is there, which is good news for us too. Is like you were saying, the question is, are you pushing Jesus at a distance? Like, there's still hope. The gospel always provides hope.
Yes, absolutely.
Which leads us to our last point, and we're short on time. So we always ask, where do we see Jesus in the story and kind of what we do with the story? I think it fits really well with the last point that you had in the message of, I am Barabbas. And honestly, I mean, take it whatever direction you want. I was really thinking you could reiterate the same thing you said on Sunday just to wrap it up for us here.
Yeah, the point is, whether I'm the centurion or whether I'm part of the crowd, whomever I see myself in, which, like I said, I see myself in all of them as different points of my life. The point is, we're all Barabbas. I certainly see myself as Barabbas.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I am. I know that I deserve death according to the law.
Right.
The Romans had a law, and Barabbas, we know from Scripture, was likely trying to create an insurrection. He was legitimately trying to start an insurrection to overthrow the government.
Mm-hmm.
That was against the law, and the law said that someone who did that deserved death. And they were in charge. Here's the bottom line: you can say, well, the Romans were holding him, were mistreating the Jews if you want to, but the bottom line is they were in charge. It was their prerogative to make that law, and he knew it, and he violated it. We can argue semantics or that God shouldn't make this sin or make that sin if you want to, but it's not our world.
Right.
It's not our creation. He created it. He has the right to make whatever law he wants to, and we have violated it. We are guilty, as Barabbas was. Barabbas was dead guilty. Nobody ever has made the argument, oh, well, Barabbas wasn't really guilty.
Right.
No, we all know he was guilty. But Jesus, the sinless one, said, listen, I'll die for him. He could have stopped it at any moment, and he didn't. Barabbas was set free. Jesus died so Barabbas could be set free. And Jesus died so I could be set free.
Absolutely.
That's it in a nutshell.
Like Pastor Tim said earlier, Easter is this coming up Sunday. If you don't have a home church, if you don't have somewhere you're going to be for Easter, we would love to have you
Absolutely.
at 9 or 11. And you're going to hear the hope, the whole reason for it as we come on Easter Sunday, as we see that this wasn't the end of the story. This wasn't where
Amen.
it ended.
Thank
Christ
goodness.
doesn't go to the grave and stay there. He truly has risen. And because of that, we're going to see the hope for all eternity. But Pastor Tim, would you mind closing us in a word of prayer?
Absolutely. Father God, we love you, and we're so thankful for your mercy and grace that you show us every day. God, we're so thankful that you chose to go to the cross, that you didn't say, you know what, these people are not worth it. This crowd is not worth it. These centurions are not worth it. God, I'm so thankful that you looked down through time and you saw Tim Sizemore, not just like all of humanity. You saw me as an individual and said, you know what, he's not worth it, but I'm going to die for him anyway. And God, I pray for those listening, for those not listening. God, I pray for all those here in Middle Georgia especially, that you help us reach them. To see that we are all Barabbas. God, just help us overcome our own shortcomings to do your will the way you would have us do it. In Jesus' holy and precious name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Hope to see you Sunday.